Journalism and Mass Communication at Kent State. And I would like to first of all thank Time Warner Cable and Robert J. Events and Catering for sponsoring our keynote presentation and contributing to yet another successful YouToo social media conference. So thank you, sponsors. Yes, go ahead. This year's keynote I'm honored to introduce because he is very near and dear to me, both professionally and personally. He's the principal of Holtz Communication and Technology. He brings more than 35 years of experience to his client engagements. He's the author or co-author of 6 communication-themed books, including Tactical Transparency, How Leaders Can Leverage Social Media to Maximize Value and Build a Brand, which the professional attendees received as part of their registration today. He's also a fellow of the International Association of Business Communicators, or IABC, where he's an accredited business communicator. He's a founding research fellow for the Society for New Communication Research and a member of the External Advisory Board for the Mayo Clinic Center for Social Media. He's a blogger and the co-host of the first and longest-running PR-focused podcast for immediate release, the Hobson and Holtz Report. And before I actually introduce him to talk, I just want to tell you a short story. We're PR people, right? That's what we do. So as a graduate student way back in 2005, I stumbled upon the For Immediate Release podcast, or FIR, as we like to call it. Back then, they were in the double digits of their episodes when I found it, in contrast to the 700th episode milestone they're going to hit on Monday with next week's episode. So it was at that time my world really opened up into this burgeoning world of traditional and online public relations. So since then, he has literally been a voice of knowledge in my career through the podcast, through his blog, and through other social mediums. For my graduate project, he actually found and signed an out-of-print copy of one of his books, Public Relations on the Net. So that was excellent. And I feel like I received part of my education from him through the books and through the podcast. So I used to joke that I got a MA in FIR, which I thought was hilarious. So his dedication to our industry is steadfast and quite frankly amazing. We were talking last night that they have missed one weekly episode of the For Immediate Release podcast because that day happened to fall on Christmas one year. But ever since 2005, they've been moving. So please join me in a warm welcome for our keynote presentation, Shel Holtz.
Thanks, Luke. There it is. As long as Luke told a story, I'll tell a story. Luke was one of our early listeners, and he sent us an audio file one day. And what he had done was he had taken little clips from various episodes and turned it into a murder mystery, one of those Agatha Christie, and then there were none type of mysteries with my voice and Neville's voice, my co-host. And the fact that somebody would dedicate that kind of time to something like that just absolutely blew us away. And we have had other listeners do similar types of things. It's been quite an experience. Well, thank you all for the invitation to come and speak with you today. This is the first time I have done this presentation. I hope it goes well. But it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, this whole idea of real-time marketing that everybody is talking about. After the Super Bowl, you remember the Super Bowl? Where the lights went out. David Armano, for whom I have just boatloads of respect, he's a brilliant guy. He's an executive vice president for Edelman Digital. And he wrote a blog post that said, the real winner of the Super Bowl was real-time marketing. And he used as his initial example this, which Kevin alluded to in his remarks this morning, and probably most of you have heard something about because it has generated an incredible amount of buzz. What happened was that the Oreo cookie team, monitoring the Super Bowl, saw the lights go out, continued to be out for a while. They said, we'll jump on this. They had their team there that could develop the digital asset. As soon as it was posted online, they sent out the tweet and did the Facebook status update, leading you to the ad. You can see the tweet there that says, power out, no problem. You click the link, and it took you to the digital asset that said you can still dunk in the dark. And this thing was retweeted massively. You can see 15,000 retweets and 5,470 favorites on that particular tweet. This was a huge success, and everybody decided that they had to duplicate this. There were some organizations at the Super Bowl that were busily trying to duplicate it themselves, including an Edelman client, Cars.com, which I'll show you in a second. But you can see that when it comes to real-time data, the fact that organizations are really looking at what's happening right now in order to craft the social and the digital communications that they're going to do in order to capitalize on what's happening right now, is surging. We're seeing massive investments in these real-time monitoring efforts. And I think this is great. I think the more that we can know about what our customers are saying, what our constituents are saying, stakeholders, prospective consumers, the more that we can do to make sure that what we're communicating is relevant and compelling to those audiences. But we seem to have swung a little too far in this newsroom direction. I've been reading and hearing a lot about the idea of real-time brand marketing newsrooms. This happens to be the newsroom that Edelman set up for Cars.com during the Super Bowl. And you can see one of the staff members there is there at the whiteboard writing down interesting things that are happening in real time, and they're talking about them and which ones can we use to produce a tweet or a Facebook update or something in real time. Here's one of the works of genius that they came up with. Can't handle the drama of the power outage? You can still shop for cars on Cars.com with the hashtag no drama. I don't know about you, but I think that's a stretch. I think you're really pushing it to try to make a connection between the power outage at the Superdome in New Orleans and shopping for cars on Cars.com. Now, there's a reason that Oreo was able to pull this off. As Kevin said, they did a campaign called the Daily Twist, part of a larger effort called 100 Days of Oreo. It was the 100 days leading up to the actual anniversary of the founding of the Oreo cookie brand. It was the 100th anniversary, and so every day they would release, and I'll show you some of these in a bit, they would release another image. And the images always had something to do with that day. They knew it was National Apple Pie Day or something like that. It was the anniversary of some event or the birthday of some famous person. And they would take an Oreo cookie and do something with it artistically. Some of them were animated. For example, on the 4th of July, the cookies shot up in the air and exploded like fireworks. But they also were paying attention to current events so that when something happened in the news, if they could figure out a nice connection where they could create that brand image for the Oreo cookie, they would scrap the image that they had planned, very quickly craft one that was relevant to that breaking news, and deploy that day. And it got to the point where everybody was looking for it. It was really interesting, it was fun, people started sharing it, but it wasn't happening just once. It was happening every day for 100 days. So I would share something interesting with you that I saw. You'd start following it. 5 days later, they would do something that resonated with you. You'd share that with your friends. And by the time the 100 days ended, and by the way, if you're not aware, on the 100th day, they established a pop-up agency in Times Square, a little booth right there in Times Square, and they staffed it with representatives of their 4 major agencies. This would be their brand agency, their advertising agency, their digital agency, and they took suggestions from the public about what that last image should be on that actual anniversary of the Oreo cookie, and you could stand outside this booth, it was all glass, and watch them create this asset. And you could watch on a live stream, too, if you weren't actually in Times Square. And then they deployed that final image. So this was all leading up to something they had been talking about, built momentum. And when the Super Bowl came along a couple of months later and they saw the blackout, they said, well, we could do another one of our images around this. They already had the people following them. because of the earlier campaign. And the whole thing around the blackout, nobody had done anything like this before, responding with an ad to something that is still going on. Right? The power was still out in the Superdome when this tweet was sent out. Okay. So this was original. I don't understand why brands everywhere think copying this and stretching to copy this is going to resonate with customers, first of all, and second of all, is going to lead people to buy your product, which, let's face it, is the ultimate goal of any marketing campaign. As I was telling the group in my little Q&A earlier, I hear all kinds of definitions of ROI. Right? ROI means you're making money, that you made more than it cost you to produce. It's an accounting term. And I always worry when people go into an executive's office and say the ROI of this campaign was an improved reputation. When the communicator leaves the room, the executive looks at a peer and says, these idiots in communications don't understand business. Because ROI is an accounting term, and it has a very, very defined meaning. I guarantee you that the folks at Nabisco can tell you what the ROI of this campaign is. They can tie increased sales to the increased awareness of the cookie, and they can probably track it against those 100 days as they wore on. Can't handle the drama of the power outage. You can see that it had 6 retweets and 3 favorites. And for this, they established this newsroom with Cars.com and Edelman's staff working late into the evening. And yet, I have seen posts by highly reputable and important people saying that this is the future of marketing. God help us if this is the future of marketing. Shiv Singh, who runs digital for Pepsi worldwide, has said if every organization starts culture jacking in order to promote their brand, their company, their products, their services, it's all going to end up being overwhelming. And Frank Eliason, who started the customer service account on Twitter, Comcast Cares, which was the first real dedicated effort that we saw to provide customer service over Twitter, said what it really is spam. It's organizations pushing this stuff out into the stream, and if it gets too carried away, we're going to end up being inundated with this in our Facebook feeds and our Twitter feeds and the like. The question came up during Kevin's talk, where are the kids going if they're leaving Facebook? And while I question whether they're leaving Facebook, because it's, Facebook is like the yellow pages now. Everybody's got to copy the book regardless of how often you use it. Where they're going is into messaging apps like WhatsApp and Kik, where it's more direct communication with people they actually know. Friends versus Facebook friends. And brands aren't even talking about this yet. And I think that the people who are using these apps are perfectly happy with that, because this gets back to what Facebook originally was, an opportunity to engage with my friends, not to get marketing messages like this. Well, after the Super Bowl, other organizations everywhere said, we need to be doing this. We need to be investing massive resources in this real-time marketing effort. And everybody was out there trying to leverage what was going on at the Oscars so that they could send out a tweet that would recapture the magic of the Oreo power outage tweet. So you had US Cellular. Now you want to talk about stretching? With US Cellular, you won't be miserable. Okay. The sky won't fall. The sky may fall, but we won't drop your call. Or my favorite, there's nothing like a hat trick, because Lincoln was, these are really working at it, and these didn't even happen in real time. These were all planned in advance to go out during the Olympics. Oscar Mayer at least was a little bit clever, noting that Oscar was trending the night of the Oscars, and it must be a lot of sandwich making going on right now. At least they found some relevance, and Oscar was indeed trending at the time, and you'll notice that it did get 705 retweets, which I guess doesn't suck, but here's Special K. Did you dream a dream about the Best Picture winner? Retweet if you think this film will triumph tonight. Yeah, well, okay, 8 people bought into that. I don't understand what Special K has to do with Les Miserables, other than, how thin Anne Hathaway was. Maybe you can get there if you go on that Special K diet. I mean, we continue to see these attempts as people feel like they have to come up with something. And it's getting to the point where there's criticism now leveled at organizations that seem to fail to capitalize on an opportunity. I must have read 15 different blog posts that took Poland spring water to task for not doing something in real time when Senator Marco Rubio had his little awkward reach for the bottled water during his GOP reply to the State of the Union. If you didn't see it, he reached way off camera to grab the water, took a sip. He'd been sweating pretty profusely before that. And then, for some reason, he reached way off camera again to put it back down, and it was pretty clear that it was Poland spring water. Now, Poland spring water hadn't updated their Twitter account in about 2 years before this. So marketers, not average consumers who might buy Poland spring water, mind you, but marketers and people who are inside the social media bubble went rushing over to the Poland spring water Twitter account and Facebook page to see how they were brilliantly going to capitalize on this, and they didn't do anything, and so they wrote blog posts calling it a fail. They actually called it a fail because Poland spring water opted not to polarize their customer base on one or the other side of the political spectrum. I wouldn't have advised them to do that. I just found it mind-boggling that people thought that was actually a mistake on their part. But we continue to see organizations do this. Sprint. Lincoln may not know what a cell phone is, but even he can appreciate truly unlimited data while on the Sprint network. No, he can't. He's dead. What were they thinking? I mean, did they feel like they had to say something about the Oscars? And if they did, couldn't they have come up with something a little more relevant and I mean, this is just complete nonsense. And yet it got 60 retweets. I guess they were probably happy with this. And then we come to Monday. Just this past Monday, the horrific events in Boston with the bombing at the Boston Marathon. And you have Epicurious, which is one of the leading recipe and foodie sites on the web, sending out tweets like, "Boston, our hearts are with you. Here's a bowl of breakfast energy we could all use to start today." And it took you to a recipe for some quinoa cinnamon something or other. To their credit, they weren't actually selling anything. The recipe was free. But this seemed awfully insensitive to a lot of people, right? That here we have people who are suffering these grievous wounds. We have people mourning the injuries and the deaths. You have a city in shock. There's still the hunt for the suspects in this, and we're talking about recipes. Sometimes it's okay to just shut up for a while. Peter Shankman, who's the fellow who started the service Help a Reporter Out, posted an item that said, "No business ever suffered great losses by not saying anything for 24 hours. Right? But this, I think, was not Epicurious going, "Wow, here's an opportunity for us to share a recipe." I think this was Epicurious saying, we are bound to have to culture jack and news jack events because this is what marketing is today, and therefore we have to find a way to leverage this news in order to get some attention for ourselves. I think they have bought into this mentality. And I think a lot of organizations have bought into this mentality, and I think it will do them no good at a number of levels. First of all, it's just not attracting the kind of sharing and buzz that you want to get out of your digital and social efforts. It can bring you certainly unwanted attention, but even the ones that are generating the retweets, I have to ask, was there a call to action? And is this somehow moving the needle in your marketing campaign? Is this somehow moving the needle in your organization's bottom line goals? Has it led people to be customer? I mean, wherever you are, at what phase of the marketing funnel, whether you're trying to generate awareness or become the considered brand that they're going to think about, or you're actually converting them to your brand, are you actually measuring the impact, or are you just saying, we got X number of retweets? I suppose that can help if you're trying to build awareness of your organization, but when you're building awareness, it's around capabilities, right? It's around how you can fit with my needs, or how your product can solve my problem, or reduce hassle in my life. And I'm just not sure that drawing attention for the fleeting moment that these events are happening is going to do that. It's going to have that kind of an effect with the customer. It's pretty easy to find out what is trending these days. Twitter shows trending topics. This happens to be off the Twitter list of trending topics for 2012. And some of the big ones in sports and what the conversation starters in politics were. You can go at any given moment and newsjack or culture jack what everybody is talking about. But I think there's a difference between doing that intelligently and simply trying to find something that is clever and witty that people will chuckle at and maybe share with their friends. There are great ways that you can do that. I don't think this is one of them. This is Virgin Mobile, and Virgin Mobile has been in the marketing world news real heavily lately based on what they have done in partnership with BuzzFeed. They have created a newsroom, and the head of digital marketing at Virgin Mobile very proudly says this newsroom only cost them in the low six figures. Which means anywhere from $100,000 up, right? Probably under $500,000 if it's in the low six figures. This newsroom has about 9 people full-time staffing it. This includes copywriters and designers that have been hired by Virgin Mobile, and staff people from BuzzFeed that are being paid by Virgin Mobile that are looking at what their target market is talking about right now, and coming up with BuzzFeed content that Virgin Mobile sponsors, like 15 amazing hashtags from your first week at college. Apparently, this was a trending hashtag at that particular time, so they threw together these 15 images with the hashtags on them, and they are touting in their promotion of how effective this newsroom effort has been the hundreds of thousands of page views these have gotten. And I'm certainly not going to deny that they have gotten those page views. I guess, first of all, my question is, how many of them noticed that little Virgin Mobile bug at the top before they started scrolling through all the clever and funny images? And the second is, how many of those people are even considering Virgin Mobile to replace the cell carrier that they're using now? They're not sharing any of those numbers. Now, it could be that those are proprietary and they don't want competitors to know about it, but I'm not even hearing anybody ask the question. What are the bottom line ROI results that you're getting from this effort? I mean, they're getting a lot of page views that people may not even associate with the brand. You know, so are they effective at getting people to look at their content? Yeah, sure, and they've done, hundreds of these. Are they selling more cell phones and cell phone plans? I don't know, but somehow I doubt it. Part of the problem with all of this is that the idea of the newsroom emerged and spread like wildfire among a bunch of people who have never worked in a newsroom and have no idea what goes on in a newsroom. I briefly worked in a newsroom. I got my degree in journalism, and I worked for a daily paper for about 1.5 years, and then a community weekly before I made the move into organizational communications. But I was there long enough to know that what we didn't do was spend all day glued to the police scanner. Right? And that seems to be what the concept of the newsroom is for marketers. We're just going to glue ourselves into what people are talking about right now and react to that. And there was other stuff that we did in a newsroom. For example, if we knew that something was going to be happening in a week, the yacht regatta is coming, or there's going to be a special election, whatever it may be, you knew something was on the horizon, you got all your resources prepared. You did all of your background research. You did the stories about leading up to the actual event. You figured out what stories you wanted to produce on site as the event was going on. So there's all this preparation that you would do to cover something in real time that you knew was coming up. There are ongoing issues that have nothing to do with what's happening right now. Right? Every community, every city has these ongoing issues, and you have staff that are dedicated to continuing to update your readers or your viewers about where things are with that, what the latest progress is, what the status is. We're doing investigations. Investigative journalism is alive and well, a little less with the traditional sources of that, now more with organizations like ProPublica. But the investigation by ProPublica into the actions at the hospital in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina, that was reported, 2 years after Katrina, won a Pulitzer Prize and has led to some policy changes in a lot of hospitals. But it had nothing to do with what was happening at the moment. Okay? Media advisories come out that say, here's some stories you can cover about us, and the editors are going to look at those and decide what's worth covering. Right? You have beat reporters. Right? Yeah, City Hall, you're in City Hall, just trying to find out what's going on that the public should know about. And then you have your regular desks, a sports desk, a style desk, a city desk. None of this is tied to the idea of listening to that police scanner to hear about the latest grisly accident on the freeway or the latest attempt to hold up a 7-Eleven, which is generally what's coming over the police scanner. Yes, we're going to pay attention, and if it's something that needs to be covered, we'll send a team out to cover it, or a reporter or a photographer. But this is not at the heart of what a newsroom does. And yet this is the only thing that a newsroom does in the marketing world. If we're going to look at real-time marketing in terms of what it can really do for organizations, we have to adopt a newsroom mentality that is more reflective of what a real newsroom does and less focused on what everybody's talking about right now that we can take advantage of. Now, there are times that certain organizations can be effective in real-time marketing by talking about what's happening right now. If you are handling the social media account for Nike basketball, real-time commentary on the NC2A tournament makes perfect sense. Everybody's expecting you to do that. And if you can get off a nice clever line every now and then, all that much better. But engaging in that real-time one-way communication during the NC2A basketball tournament, if what you do is sell basketball shoes and other basketball apparel, that makes perfect sense. This is what the 100 Days of Oreo, the daily twist, looked like. The twist, of course, comes from the fact that you twist an Oreo cookie to separate it and get to the creamy white filling, of which I've had far too much. And this is an example of one where they scrapped the one that they had planned that day and took advantage of some breaking news. David Meerman Scott calls this newsjacking, and I think it's just fine and can be effective, particularly in the context of this larger campaign that was going on. So I don't know what they actually had scheduled for August 8th, but that was the day they uncovered what scholars were saying was absolutely, definitely a lost Da Vinci sketch that nobody had ever seen before. So they said, great, what we could do is we could take an Oreo cookie and put it on an easel and recognize this breaking news story. They did this around probably 8 or 10 breaking news stories over those 100 days. The Mars rover landing, they had the tire tracks going through the orange filling of an orange Oreo cookie, and they had a smile on the icing of the cookie the day Phyllis Diller passed away. So they were very thoughtful in terms of which ones we're going to take advantage of to replace the planned image for National Florist Day or whatever it might have been. So people got very accustomed to all of this. But newsjacking, if you're going to do it well, isn't just getting a tweet out that some people might notice. It is injecting yourself somehow into a breaking news story so that you can become part of that news story. And there are some really good examples of this. My favorite, which David Scott covered in his book, which I believe is only an ebook. So, you know, for $2.99 you can get this and read it in an afternoon. But I love this story that had to do with the burning of this house. This is one of Richard Branson's homes on a private island that caught fire and burned early one morning. And he had some guests at his house the day his house caught fire, one of whom was Kate Winslet. Another was his 90-year-old mother. And Kate Winslet rescued Richard Branson's 90-year-old mother and carried her from the flames. So this was a major breaking story, particularly in the UK, but you know, global coverage just based on the fact that Richard Branson and Kate Winslet are both internationally known figures. So what happened is that you had the London Fire Brigade, a firehouse in London, happened to have a blog. And the guy who wrote the blog for the London Fire Brigade wrote this post: London Fire Brigade is offering Kate Winslet the opportunity to train with firefighters after she bravely rescued Richard Branson's mother from a fire on his multi-million-pound luxury holiday island. So you have reporters who have been assigned the story of this rescue, and everybody's going to write essentially the same story because everybody has access to fundamentally the same facts. So in order to find an angle that will make your story more compelling than the one that the reporter down the street is writing, they go online, they do a search, and what do they find? Because this blog post was written as these events were unfolding, which meant that it was very, very timely, and because it was written in such a way that it was optimized for search. You'll notice that rather lengthy and factual headline contains every keyword that you would need for Google to pull that up high in search results based on every bit of the algorithm that they use to decide what should get to the top of a search engine results page. This became part of the second graph in hundreds of stories that were written and broadcast about this rescue. I think this is a remarkably effective use of newsjacking. You'll notice that it is highly relevant. Now, whether Kate Winslet will ever go avail herself of fire rescue training at the London Fire Brigade, I'd probably bet real money that she won't. I don't think that they ever had any expectation that she would. I think their expectation was that the London Fire Brigade, the fact that they employ hundreds of women, the fact that they provide training for people to be able to be effective in the event of a fire, made its way into hundreds of stories that people were watching, listening to, and reading. That is a really great example of tapping into breaking news or a cultural meme in order to get the word out and get people talking about your organization. Is an example of one of the stories that appeared. This one happened to be in the Daily News of London. And what it said was, as for Winslet, the London Fire Brigade recognized her firefighting potential and extended an offer for the actress to join them for training. And then what did they do? They called somebody at the London Fire Brigade for an interview. So now the London Fire Brigade not only gets their blog post into the story, but they're getting more press from people calling and looking for more information. Kate has shown true bravery. The brigade's deputy assistant commissioner, Danny Colton, told the BBC, "We would love her to visit." He told the network he hoped Winslet's daring rescue would encourage other women to be firefighters. There's a key message that they're trying to get out here, as opposed to, gee, in the dark you can still shop for cars at cars.com. You can crowdsource live coverage. That your audience actually, before we talk about crowdsourcing, let's talk about just live coverage of things that your audience is actually interested in. And what you have here is a funeral in Philadelphia for the head of the fire department. Interesting that I would show that right after the London Fire Brigade. But what you see down, let's see if this will show up here, right down here, this is in the blog of this ABC affiliate in Philadelphia. This is a service called Cover It Live. And Cover It Live, very inexpensive, in fact, free at a certain level. very inexpensive to use afterwards. A lot of journalism organizations are using it. Allows you to embed a little code in your blog and then use Cover It Live to continually provide updates on the situation. And you can inject graphics, and you can inject polls, and you can allow people to submit questions. So this is a reporter who was on site covering this funeral for somebody who was apparently much beloved in Philadelphia, so that people who couldn't attend could still get a sense of what it was like to be there. And you can see Corey Herman, who's from 6abc.com, is saying, this recorded video is being fed back in from the graveside services. There's not a live signal, but then you get a comment from somebody saying how important this is. My dad died in a fire. He was a firefighter. This is all important stuff. So you get a lot of engagement with the community by providing this kind of real-time coverage. There are not enough corporations covering real-time events this way, but we all in the business world have annual shareholder meetings and product unveilings and press conferences when a crisis occurs. There's so many opportunities to provide real-time coverage for people who can't be there that we're not taking advantage of because we're too busy right now with the nonsense going out over Twitter that everybody says is what we need to be spending all of our time on. The White House has been live blogging for quite some time. Initiated with the first Obama administration. There was live blogging of some conferences that were held initially, and now they live blog pretty much everything that's going on. You're not limited to live blogging. You can live tweet. This is a live tweeting that was going on around, I believe it was the launch of the Facebook Home Android launcher. Has anybody installed Facebook Home yet? I got one. How is it? Any good?
No, I deleted within 5 minutes.
Deleted within 5 minutes. We're not going to talk about Facebook Home. But this was live coverage from Information Week, the technology publication, over Twitter. So, I mean, you'd expect Information Week to be covering this. And as long as they let you know in advance that on our Twitter feed, our reporter, Phil Johnson, ITW Phil Johnson is his Twitter handle, will be reporting from Facebook headquarters about the introduction of this new phone tool. If you're interested in that, this could be one of the resources you go to, particularly it's not Information Week, it's IT World. If IT World is a trusted source, a trusted guide to this kind of information for you. One of my favorite examples of real time in recent months comes from Raytheon. Every year, Raytheon holds an air show. It alternates every other year between Farnborough in the UK and Paris. So it's Farnborough Air Show and then the Paris Air Show. These are highly restricted in terms of who can get to these. These are not where vintage World War II aircraft are being flown around. This is where they're unveiling their absolute latest and new military technology to audiences of military buyers for this stuff. Generally all American and American allies, of course. This is very above board. But, the average citizen is not allowed in here. The coverage of this has been very limited and has been very confined in the past to the military. But they decided with the last show in Farnborough, which was, I think it was last December, that they wanted to spread the word more about the kind of innovation coming out of Raytheon and the cool stuff that they could share. And they decided to expand the audience to families of military enthusiasts, the people who are blogging about this stuff. And the way they did it was to create a microsite on the Raytheon website for the air show, and they started working 2 months in advance. And what they did was they lined up all of the stories, and they got them approved in advance because they knew what was going to be shown, they knew what was going to be displayed, what was going to be happening at the air show. And they left the little holes in all of this coverage for the stuff that would have to be real time. But they also got the buy-in from leadership around approvals, and they had the staff on site to go get the approval so we could get the quote of what somebody said from the podium. We could get an approval on the photograph or the video that was shot at the air show. These things would be added to the story and they would be published. Right? So again, 2 months in advance, topping off the stories with what was going on there in real time, securing those fast approvals, and employing professional journalistic standards. This is what a lot of people these days are calling brand journalism. It's not marketing speak, it's real journalism being applied to the organization's coverage of itself. And so they made sure that the quotes were not something the PR department wrote for the head of marketing, it was something the guy actually really said. And they worked in advance to get the leaders of the organization comfortable with the idea that what you really said is what's going in. We're not going to change it for you if you think later I could have said that better. Right? This is journalism. The photos were candids and not staged. The interviews were real interviews, not something where the marketing department, the PR department sat down and said, okay, how are we going to fabricate this interview? It was all real journalism. They worked with an editorial calendar, which is something that I see woefully few organizations doing with their digital and real-time marketing efforts. They're looking at the various channels that they have available to them, the dates of the air show, and the kinds of stories they have, and they're ensuring they have nice even distribution of video and images and articles across all of the different channels, covering all of the elements of the show that they want people to know about or that they think their audience would be interested in. And they produced some pretty dramatic results. You can see that between the Paris Air Show in 2011 and the Farnborough Air Show in 2012, they posted less and they got more bang for the buck in terms of the total number of visitors expanded because they were creating an appeal that went just beyond the military. Right? How long people stayed because the content was actually more interesting and more compelling, and how many people from outside the US came and visited. All increased dramatically. Now, this isn't somebody at the office saying, hey, our Farnborough Air Show is going on. Let's throw together a newsroom, watch the company's live feed, and see what we can tweet out. This was planned meticulously in advance in order for them to be able to produce this kind of effective real-time marketing. You can also fabricate real time. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't do something in real time that you have invented. At the MD Anderson Cancer Center at the University of Texas, they routinely do tweet chats. This one happens to be about how to identify your cancer risk. And they have a doctor who works with the cancer risk part of the organization. They promote this well in advance, saying, look, everyone, at this particular time, on this particular day, this expert on cancer risk is going to be taking your questions over Twitter. And they get enough people engaging in real time that they now have content that they can store on the web, become searchable, discoverable through the use of search engines. So somebody querying about cancer risk is very likely to find this Twitter-based Q&A with a subject matter expert. It was definitely real time. It happened in real time, but we didn't wait for something to break on this at MD Anderson Cancer Center. They created the real-time event out of whole cloth. You can crowdsource real-time coverage. At South by Southwest, Taco Bell, which has this campaign going called Feed the Beat, which is providing food to struggling independent artists. They had a concert, and they asked people to submit the footage that they shot of the concert, the people who were in the audience watching the show. And these were Vine 6-second videos. There was stuff they were uploading to YouTube. The stuff they were sharing on Facebook. All of this was submitted, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of video submitted to the folks at Taco Bell, who are using that and nothing but that to make a rockumentary about this show. Again, the show's happening in real time. What can we do that engages our audience that also supports this Feed the Beat effort that we have underway? There's a direct link. The relevance is pretty clear. Another example of crowdsourcing takes us back to Farnborough. This tool is called Storify. Storify is a content curation tool. I use it rather heavily. I'm a big fan of Storify, which I guess yesterday just announced that they're moving to some paid models for journalism. But basically what I can do is anything I find on the web that fits the category of the story I'm reporting, I can add to the story. You can go to just the story and read every tweet, every blog post, every YouTube video that I have found that I think fits into this curated collection. Now, I primarily use Storify for longitudinal purposes. I have ongoing Storify stories around things like content marketing, why employees at organizations should have access to social media and not be blocked. I have about 8 of these that I continue to add stuff to. Most of them are done, though, for short-term reporting. In fact, when the Washington Post found that they had nobody on the ground when police were evacuating the Occupy protesters in the DC location, they used the Storify story of a graduate student who lived in an apartment above the park who saw it all going on out his window and created a Storify story and started collecting the tweets and videos and photos from the people who were on the ground. And the Post said, we don't have anybody there. Let's just take the embed code off the Storify story and put it on the homepage of the Washington Post website. And that became their coverage. So what the guy at Raytheon did, in addition to everything else he was doing that we talked about a couple of minutes ago, was he started a Storify story, and he said, look, if you're on your way to the Farnborough Air Show, use this hashtag, and I'm going to collect them all in a Storify story. So this is all the tales of getting to the show as told by the people who were going to the show. And all Raytheon had to do around this one was curate it and draw attention to it. So as we think about this in terms of social media strategy, there's more that we can do with real time. If we're looking at what people are talking about in real time, if we look at the data that we can collect, and there's tons of it, we now call it big data, because mining the nuggets out of all of this information takes a fair amount of savvy and a fair amount of work. I predict every PR agency and every big company communications department will eventually hire a quant who knows how to analyze data so that they can let everybody else know what's important. It's got to go beyond the clever tweet and the opportunity to market to audiences right now. If we see a shift in consumer sentiment because we, the communicators, are monitoring in real time, we need to be able to take that information to other parts of the organization so they can make decisions that are more business process decisions or supply chain decisions based on that information. I think confining this to the outbound push of traditional marketing misses most of the opportunity that we get out of this stuff. Dell, the computer maker, has created this social net advocacy platform. Now, I know it looks like something that they're selling. They're not. This is strictly for internal purposes at Dell, and yet they're getting 5 patents out of the development of this. Taking all of the data that they have access to about people talking about Dell and its products and its services, they're able to identify a sentiment shift in the conversation at a very granular level. They can find, for example, that there is a shift in the conversation around a particular model of notebook computer. The shift has gone negative among influencers in the developer community. And the reason the shift has occurred and has gone south is because they don't understand why the developer version of the laptop costs so much more than the regular consumer version of the laptop. And they were able to take this information, they were able to actually drill down right within the tool and read what people were saying. They have a lot of ways that they have set up to deal with things like this. For example, they have identified subject matter experts in the organization who already have a social media footprint in their area of expertise. So they may not be out there touting themselves as Dell employees, but they're talking in the communities that talk about cloud computing. And they've established themselves as experts and go-to people and knowledgeable resources in those communities. So what they're able to do is if the conversation is about Dell Cloud Services, they can go to one of these people and say, can you jump into that community based on your existing reputation and your knowledge in this area and have that conversation with them on behalf of Dell. Well, that's not what they did in the case of this laptop. In the case of this laptop, within 24 hours, without having to go to the top of the organization to get approval, they lowered the price of the laptop. They didn't send anybody out to convince anybody why what we're doing is right. Right? They didn't send out a clever tweet or a Facebook update or come up with a digital ad. They responded to the issue by fixing it. They determined that was the best way to go. And because they had all the processes in place, they were able to do that. And they were able to do that in pretty damn close to real time. Does it have a marketing effect? Well, hell yeah. As all of those people who were critical see that the price has changed because of their critique, all of that sentiment just starts to skyrocket. Now the developers are out buying that model laptop. But it's a business process decision that got made. Some people refer to this as social business as opposed to social media. But we, the communicators, being the ones who are getting this data, need to be able to feed this back to the parts of the organization that make these decisions. That's where the power of real time comes in. Now, there's some stuff we're going to need to do first, because right now, the C-suite and the boards of directors aren't taking this very seriously. There's a study that came out of Stanford Graduate Business School and said despite the fact that something like 75% of members of the C-suite and members of boards of directors have social media accounts, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, they're basically using it passively to stay up to speed on what's going on in their communities and not actively engaging. When anybody asks, are you getting reports at the executive board level or at the board of directors level talking about consumer sentiment and social media, the answer is, nah, that's marketing stuff. They're not even concerning themselves with it. And we'll never be able to build this stuff into business processes until the leaders of the organization recognize that it's got to be more than you can still buy cars at cars.com when the power's out. I suppose if you have a good charge on your battery on your tablet or laptop. Right? Gordon Evans at Salesforce said the brands that listen in real time and take advantage of that information to either readjust their campaigns or respond to commentary or customer service issues are the brands that are being successful in social. And I think that those that have jumped on this bandwagon to use it as a one-way push of clever commercials may think that that's the be-all and end-all of what marketing has become, but I certainly hope that most of us will be far more professional and far more diligent in how we use this to produce actual return on investment and move the needle in our organizations. So, do I have time for questions? About 5 minutes. Anyone have a question? Yeah.
There's a fine line, really, between marketing and public relations and how they interface with social media and creating some of the great tweets from Oreo and some of the real bad ones from cars.com. How do you see the integrated approach?
Yeah, the question, if you couldn't hear, was that there's a fine line between marketing and social media, and how do you integrate these well? There's a lot of talk right now about this notion of convergence. We have had separate departments to deal with owned media, earned media, social media. It gets sliced and diced a variety of different ways. I've heard social media often referred to as rented media because you're using Facebook and you're using Twitter, but they're not yours, so they're clearly not owned. Right? I am a big fan of the idea of convergence. I am not a big fan of this notion of tearing down the silos. Everybody seems to hate silos. We have to tear down those silos. You guys in Ohio, you know what happens when you tear down the silo. All the grain falls out, right? Silos exist for a reason. Silos are there so that you can allocate resources intelligently based on what the people in that part of the organization are supposed to do. If you converge everything into one large communications department, how do you allocate resources for media buying? For example, I work in PR. I don't need to know media buying. You can't have people become experts in all of this. I think what we need to do is have lots and lots of windows in these silos and more collaboration, more meetings so everybody's up to speed on what everybody else is doing, and everybody's ready at the drop of a hat to come together to do something. I think especially when you're mounting a campaign, you don't start with, this is an advertising campaign, this is a PR campaign, this is a marketing campaign. You start saying, and the reason for this, by the way, is your consumer doesn't care anymore. I mean, it used to be really obvious. If you're watching the commercial on TV, that's an advertisement. If you're reading about it in the paper, that was probably pitched by a PR person. But today, it's one big content stew, right? You watch something on YouTube and you don't go, gee, I wonder if this was originally a TV commercial or if it was intended for something else. Nobody gives a crap about the provenance of content, right? The only question is, did it grab me? Was it interesting to me? Do I want to talk about it? Do I want to share it? It's all anybody cares about. So I think you start with what is it we're trying to get across to people and what kinds of content do we want to deploy, and then you parcel out the assignments to the advertisers who have to go out and buy time or buy space, and to the PR people who do have to get people talking about it in the media and in the blogosphere and the like. It has to be a coordinated effort. So I think convergence is real important, but the idea of one great big communications department, because owned, earned, paid, and social don't make any sense anymore, sure they do. It's just blurring. It doesn't mean they've vanished. So much more collaboration and cooperation, because these departments do tend to compete within departments traditionally. We have to get over that and start working together to make these things hang together so that ultimately what happens is what we want to happen, which is that people discover the content, people talk about the content, people share the content, and we move the needle. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Sure. There seems to be, for a lot of time, there's been an argument about, thank you. It seems to be that for a lot of time, there's an argument about whether PR and marketing deserve a place at the table, a place with the C-suite. It seems to me, as we move closer to this real-time marketing, there's more and more of a case and more of an argument to have PR and marketing at the table. It's almost inexcusable not to. You made a great point with Dell. Their marketing department, almost at the flick of a switch, decided to make a major decision like that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've always argued that communications needs to have a seat at the table. Of course, you get one. It's not like, the general counsel has a seat at the table, but we want 8 lawyers there because we need to have the antitrust people. And you get one seat at the table. That's going to be a chief marketing officer, a chief communications officer. And I think it's vital for a lot of reasons. There was just a study that came out. I blogged about it, in fact, and used exactly the seat at the table analogy just about a week or two ago. The study came out, and basically what it said was bad news reported about a company drives positive strategic change. So if you are caught in a scandal, if things are going badly and the business press starts reporting about that, and it comes to the attention of executive management, it's what might drive an organization that otherwise is in denial to start making changes to fix things. Who are they going to hear that from? If it's not from the communicator that has a seat at the table bringing this to them and saying, hey, this is how we're being perceived now. It's being widely reported. We need to do something to fix this. And a press release is not going to do it. We need to go out and tell them that we are doing something about this. So for that reason alone, I think communications needs a seat at the table. That said, those executive tables that don't have a communicator, I would suggest are largely because the communicators in the organization haven't proven themselves worthy of having that seat. You don't deserve that seat. You earn that seat by producing enough value that they recognize that you will make a contribution at that level of the organization. Like I say, if you sit in there and talk about ROI being the number of page views that you had, they're never going to invite you to stay. You just don't get business. Right? But the more value you can contribute, the more they're going to say, yeah, we need to have you here. So I think it's vital. And I think that wraps up our time. One more? Great. Well, thank you very much.